And we're live, so we've got a few people here I can see in chat. Thank you all very much for tuning in, for joining to this, the first episode of Discomfort-Zone. I hope it goes well. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know if there's any problems with the audio. I can't even tell you what I've been through to get this far, but I'm glad that literally 20 seconds, I think, before this stream started, everything magically worked. So I'm not going to touch anything. You let me know if anything goes wrong and I'll try and fix it. So I would like to thank you all for joining and thank anyone who's listening to this afterwards. Before we start, thanks Crimson Cloud. Before I start, I just want to say that all of the opinions and thoughts that are presented over the next hour are my own. They don't represent MSP Waves or anyone else for that matter. So don't give them any credit. Okay, so let's just jump right in. I'll give you a general overview of what I want to do with this episode. And it's going to be two parts. The first is going to be a little bit of an introduction to who I am and, the path that I went on. Okay, can you hear me okay now? Sorry about that, the mic just moved a bit. Okay, and the path that I basically have been on that brought me to where I am here in Portugal, about to start designing the first crypto-based natural giving eco-village. So, after that, I'd like to give a general overview of what the eco-village model is, what it entails, and basically what I'm going to be talking about over the next few episodes. So let's get right into it. I was born in Jerusalem, Israel. I was raised Orthodox Jew. Both my parents were from England, and they moved to Israel a year before I was born. So I always lived in this dual culture of English and Israeli, which I don't know if you've ever met any Israelis or know anything about the culture, but these are two very, very distinct and very different cultures. So I grew up speaking both Hebrew and English as my native tongue, and that sort of shaped, I think, a lot of the way I think and generally my outlook in life. I think I was very open to differences and different ways of seeing things right from the start. And I think it really sort of showed up later on in my life, but we'll get to that soon. So I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, raised in the religion. If you don't know, there are technically 613, I'll call them rules, which you have to observe. It's a rather strict religion in terms of the do's and don'ts. At least that's how I experienced it as a child. So everything I'm saying right now is not a generalization. Please don't start, taking my words to whatever. But this was my personal experience. So, yes. Disraeli. Sorry, I'm just going to say, I'm looking at the chat. I might not comment on everything. If you have any questions throughout, feel free to shoot them. And at the end of the show, I'm hoping to have some time also to answer any questions that I haven't gone over. So just to say that. So at the age of 15, let's say, I was starting to question a lot of the things that I was taught and a lot of the things that I was told were true about the world. And it was a long process of it started a little before as well, but after 3 years when I was 18, I officially renounced my religion to my parents, and I started off on my journey in atheism, basically. And I just want to say that my parents, as there are some horror stories, I know a lot of people who left the religion, but they were very, very supportive. They were obviously very disappointed and very hurt. They'd moved to Israel in order for their children to be Jewish and religious, and it was a very hard thing for them to accept, but they did accept me fully, and I couldn't have asked them to be any more understanding, really. But from that moment on, I don't know how much experience any of you have with losing a religion, especially a child's view of religion, which is so absolute, so perfect, so all-encompassing that when you lose that, or when you are willing to give it up, in a sense, you really do lose everything. I lost not only my God, but I lost my culture, I lost my way, sort of the rules and how I'm supposed to behave in the world. I lost nearly everything. And atheism was this very supportive answer for me. This was, well, the religion of atheism in my mind, at least at the time, was science. So science in regards to looking at the world in a very factual, materialistic way, and being able to measure and compare and give exact answers was exactly what I was looking for, that I didn't find in Judaism. But after a few years roaming around atheism, as it were, and I was getting very into philosophy and these kind of subjects, I hit upon a subject which is very controversial, and I won't go into it now, but quantum mechanics. I was very, very into it at the time. Almost everyone I spoke to, the conversation, somehow I would lead it towards quantum mechanics, but that sort of raised a lot of questions, and I suddenly realized that even the scientists, or science, which was my new religion, didn't have all of the answers. And in fact, within the community, there was a lot of disagreement as to what the actual reality was, let's say, when you get down to the quantum level. So that was another bubble burst for me, and it set me on my path again to look for somewhere where I could find these truths that I was searching for, that I was desperate for, really. The answers to my questions about the purpose of life, and what is death, and what happens after, and what is morality, and what's the quote-unquote right way to behave. All of these questions were really burning in my mind, and so I continued my journey. And the next religion, although I hesitate to call it a religion, but let's say the next mindset that I approached was Taoism. Now, if you've never heard of Taoism and you've no idea what it's about, then I suggest you afterwards look it up, because it's fascinating and it's far too large or complex system for me to even, go through on this tiny little tidbit. But it was a huge, or it still is a huge part of my life, and I definitely proclaim myself as a Taoist first and foremost. And so the general idea is that within, the universe, nature, reality, there is this sort of, well, the literal translation of Tao is path or way. There is this way. You could call it motion, you could call it a flow, whatever you want to pin, whatever word you want to pin onto it, the sort of way that the universe is going. If you look at it at billions of years, you see that it's sort of changing and in motion. And Taoism is I think the essence of trying to live your life in harmony with that stream. So for me personally, I would say that my experiences in life, when I feel in tune with a Tao or in tune with reality, everything becomes much easier, much simpler. Things, quote unquote, go my way, although it's not really my way, it's the Tao. But you get this feeling that, I'm sure you've all experienced it, as someone said it today, the wind is in your back, and you're just being carried along effortlessly, doing whatever you want to do, or whatever you're meant to do. So that was my first experience. It took me a long time of studying these texts and these different ideas to really understand them, and to undo all of the materialistic mindset that science had sort of imprinted on me, well, that I had taken on. But after a long time, and I'll just mention one of my great teachers in life, whom obviously I never met personally, but a philosopher named Alan Watts, who's also English, and he brought a lot of these ideas to the West, and I would listen to hours and hours of him talking about these subjects. He's got a very soothing voice. I'd recommend, if you're interested in the subject, he's an excellent place to start. But he really got me on my way, and this became my first sort of concept of whatever you want to call it, God, or something bigger than myself, which I could really relate to. And so it was during this time, whether it's connected or not, that I was also getting very interested in psychedelics. Oh, nice, yes. I love Alan Watts. Is he here, Claiborne? No, I don't think he's here. Well, I'll listen to him later. But basically in this time it was correlated. I was listening to Alan Watts, and maybe some of you know Terence McKenna, who's a psychonaut, one of the most famous probably, very active in the 90s. And these two seemingly very... Oh, sorry. My mic keeps moving. I'm going to try and fix that. These two seemingly very different worldviews I felt were very much connected. And I won't go too in depth into either of them because it's not really relevant to how I got to the eco-village. But I will say that they shaped the way that I view reality and the way that I think about my purpose here in this lifetime. So, after being exposed to these new ideas, I started to get a sense of, I started to get answers to a lot of these questions that I'd had, and with these answers I started to get a purpose of what I want to do with my life. And that process led me on quite a few ways. The major one would have been that I was planning to become a shaman's apprentice. I got to South America. I didn't actually meet with a shaman. I was there for 6 months, and you know, as things happen, I changed quite a lot, and it was very important, but that wasn't the road that I was meant to go on. And so I came back from South America, in all honesty, to be with my wife, well, with my now wife, then girlfriend. And she sort of just finished her studying. I came back, and we both decided to go to India to really see what the next step was for us. And I think we didn't really know what we were going to look for. We just knew that we didn't have an exact idea of what the next stage in our life was, and we wanted to get some ideas from that. Oh, hey, yeah, Claiborne, good to have you join us. So yeah, if you've got any comments about either of those, please do share, because they're both great people, Terence McKenna and Alan Watts. Anyway, so we went to India for 6 months. During that time, we met two Stemians. We didn't know at the time, but later we discovered Eco Alex, whom I'm working on the Eco Village with, and he's coming in February. If you haven't been following, then go check him out. And a Stemian who isn't on as much anymore, but Eco know me, we were much closer with him, and he actually taught us for 3 months various subjects about growing food, mycology, earthships, waterworks, water management, everything that has to do with basically self-sustaining yourself from the land. It was literally a life-changing experience, and even though we kind of expected or even were looking for something like that, it was just absolutely so intense and surprising. It was very, very powerful. I won't go into all of the things that I experienced there. It definitely changed both of us from then on. But that was when we sort of got a very clear idea of the eco-village and how we wanted to live our life. Claiborne asks if I'm a fan of Ram Dass. I haven't actually listened to Ram Dass that much, but I did like what I heard. I think I listened to more interviews between him and Terence McKenna. But no, I never really got into it. Maybe send me a link of something good if you've got. Anyway, so during this time, my wife and I actually started writing a book together. And this book was we felt the message that we wanted to pass on. We felt that there weren't that many sources in Hebrew. And so if you didn't read English, or if you didn't understand English, then a lot of these things would sort of be closed off. And so we wanted to try and do our part as people who were exposed to these ideas and happened to know Hebrew, to write a book in Hebrew about this. So it's actually being translated into English right now as well. So we'll see, maybe I'll update on that later. But the general idea wasn't specifically about the eco-village. It was more about the model, sort of the problems of the world, the way that we saw them, and the model that we suggested that would replace some of the systems that we felt had some problems. So I'll get into much more of that later on, but just to sort of lead us back to Portugal, since that moment, coming back from India in 2016, both my wife and I have been working very hard towards living life in nature the way we want. And initially the plan was to do this in Israel, until we discovered that it was completely illegal, basically. Harvesting rainwater, biogas, building without foundations, all of these things are literally illegal in Israel. And when we understood that was the case, we sort of gathered that that wasn't going to be an option. And so we started looking for alternatives. And since we knew what we wanted, that was really the leading cause of what made us look for a place where we could buy land relatively cheaply, that the government would be supportive of an ecological lifestyle with all that that entails, where immigration would be possible, where the language wouldn't be too hard. And so all of these different constraints really narrowed it down. I think the two finalists were probably South America, which is a continent and lots of places, but that region, and Portugal. And in the end, I think one of the biggest deciding factors was the distance from our families. Being from Israel, 4 hours versus 14 hours is a pretty big difference. So we worked and saved up, and eventually came to a point where we felt we were ready, and we made the plunge and moved to Portugal. So we've been here now for 4 months and a bit. And if you've been following the story on Steam, you can see the progress of basically what's been happening, but it's been absolutely amazing so far. So that's a little bit about me. If anyone has any questions or anything like that, you can just write in the chat, and I'm sort of peeking every once in a while. But I'm going to move on to the second part, which is obviously the more interesting one as well, which is the eco-village model. Now, I'm just going to say that I want this podcast to be about the model and not the eco-village that we are designing here in Portugal. And so I want to just iterate the exact difference between those two. There is the eco-village that we want to live in, that's being designed with people, and it's going to be here in Portugal, etc., etc. But I feel that's a small part of a much grander scheme and much grander plan that I can see. And that is that this eco-village will be the first of many, many eco-villages worldwide, which will eventually be able to replace the current way of life. And so when I'm talking about the eco-village model, this is a global model that will be applicable anywhere, and will obviously be changed to fit whatever region or area that it's in. But the model itself will have principles that are global, that aren't changeable, and that will be a sort of template. So that's what I mean when I say the eco-village model. Revised Sociology. Great to have you here. I didn't even see you on the chat. The region in Portugal is central Portugal. It's actually half an hour from the Spanish border. You can look it up in Google Maps, Penamacor, but it's the Castelo Branco region. Excuse my accent. Okay. So there's a few points that I want to go over with the eco-village model. Oh, and Pensive is here. Thanks for joining. Wow, this is much more intimidating when I start seeing how many people are actually listening. So I'm going to carry on. So basically, there's a few principles that I'm going to go over, and these are very, very broad principles, which over the next few episodes, I'm going to be sort of going deeper into each one and really expanding on it. So the first thing I want to talk about, as far as I'm concerned, is sort of the underlying philosophy or worldview that I see under this whole eco-village model, which is modeling based on natural systems. There is a term for this, and it's called biomimicry. And if you haven't heard of it, again, I'll offer a short explanation, but I really suggest, if you're interested, to go and research, because it is fascinating. This really blew my mind when I first started to read about it. Biomimicry is, as it sounds, mimicking life, mimicking nature, which is, I'll give the easiest example that's most, I think, most famous, which are food forests. So the idea behind a food forest is you take your garden or your land or wherever you want to grow food, and you design it based on the principles that work in a forest. The idea being that a forest manages to self-regulate itself, self-regulate with all of the different variables that are needed. It gets its own water, provides its own food to all the organisms that live in, and is a completely self-sufficient system. And if you can model that in your garden, then you can have a place where the food is actually sort of growing itself, as it were. Obviously, when you design a forest that's more in tune with what you want, and that you model it around your needs as well. But that the modeling is done not in any other consideration, but what is the natural system that I can emulate, that I can copy in order to get the best result. And I think that this philosophy, that this worldview is not only applicable to agriculture, which is where obviously it's most famous, but in various other areas. And I'll go through a few of them in relation to the eco-village model. So first, we can obviously talk a lot about self-sufficiency and providing for ourselves. And I don't want to get too deep into it, because that's another subject that there's a lot of sources out there that are much more proficient than I am. And so I'll leave that to them. But the mindset is, Masanobu Fukuoka talked about this, when we approach our tasks, we can approach them in different ways. And I think one of the most common ways of approaching it is sort of looking at the problem, analyzing it to see a solution, and finding the quickest solution for that problem. So I'm going to give an example. Let's say I'm growing food and I need to water it. I go and get the hose and I connect it, and now it's being watered. But there's another way, I think, to approach problems and to approach sort of solutions that we're thinking about. And that is to look at any problem as part of an equation of two sides, where it's a very famous cliche, but one man's problem is another man's solution. If you can find the other part of the equation where your problem becomes the solution for something else, you can immediately reap a benefit from something that was actually causing harm or whatever, costing you some kind of resource. And that's what we see in nature all the time, that give and take, and these systems that develop and stabilize over the time, they stabilize thanks to this continuous relationship of give and take, of one man's is the other's, and so on. So let's talk a little bit about life in the eco-village to really start getting to the nitty-gritty of this. When I view people in the eco-village around me, let me say that when I started thinking about this, there are lots and lots of communities around the world that are doing something that I think would seem very similar to what I'm proposing. And I've visited some of them, I've heard of many more, and I know friends who have lived on many more, and the numbers are quite worrying. Basically, if you're starting a community, a self-sufficient community, statistically, you're more likely not to succeed in the long run than you are. And this led me to start and investigate, why is that? What's the problem that seems to be causing all of these amazing ideas and really amazing people who come together with so much purpose and hope? And over time, the same thing seems to happen, where whatever you want to call it, interpersonal relationships, politics, ego, emotions, all of these messy things that might take 5 or 10 years to surface, but eventually put so much pressure that people either start leaving, or in some cases there is even some kind of implosion that sort of rips it apart. And this is a real worry for me, and it's something that I really wanted to safeguard against as efficiently as possible, because I think it's the number one problem. And in all of the cases where I saw that this was happening, that there was this sort of pressure that was building underneath, I think it almost always relates to freedom and lack thereof. And so there are always these guidelines and rules, and people are forced or expected to do X amount of hours of work, or donate a certain amount of money, or pay for services, or give a percentage, or whatever it is, in order for them to function in the eco-village or in the community. And over time, this always leads to an imbalance, because people are very different. And even when you try and get only the same kind of people in one place, as long as they're similar enough, they will continue to look harder and harder for the differences and focus on that. I've lived through this personally, and I'm sure you can relate each to your own region. But when two cultures live very close together, they become very, very similar, and they seem to hate each other more and more. And the more similar they seem to people outside, the more they notice the differences. And it's a very odd phenomenon that I think is one that's worth paying attention to. In my original country, it causes a lot of strife and problems. So anyway, that's unrelated to this. But basically, when I'm talking about people living in an eco-village, what I envision is people who are living much more freely without the need to sort of own up to anyone who's overlooking. So this idea is probably my most argued point, and it has another part to it, which is, I'll get to that in a minute, but when I'm talking about this, the way that I see it working, the biomimicry element that I would like to incorporate is based on how an ant colony basically functions. And so an ant colony is a very, very interesting organism. I think once people used to believe that the queen sort of telepathically messages out to all the millions of ants what they need to do at every one time. And that really shows, I mention that because it shows the mentality, what we'll call centralization, which is you've got one locale with all of the power directing all of the different parts that are far away from it. And that's basically not a way that anything in nature arises when it comes to complex systems, whether it's mycelial networks or the roots of a tree or our body or our neural networks or an ant colony. There's a very different system in play, which is every individual is technically free to do what they want individually. And so if you look at ants that are on, some kind of mission, let's say they're cleaning up some debris that's at the entrance to the nest, you can see a group of ants sort of going together and doing this job. But if you stay and watch, you'll see that constantly there are ants that are leaving that job, and at the same time there are new ants that are coming in all the time. And if you sit and watch ants really at work, it's absolute chaos. Most of them have no idea where they're going. Some of them go around in circles. Some of them can go, very far off in one direction and just turn around and come all the way back. It's complete hectic chaos. No one is telling anyone what to do. And yet, a very interesting fact about ant colonies is that ants only live 1 year, more or less, but ant colonies can survive up to 10 and 15 years. And over that period of time, an ant colony will change its behavior. And this is very surprising because if ants only live for 1 year, and we're assuming there are no ant schools where they teach the next generation in advance, where is this information being encoded that's passed on from generation to generation and accumulated that leads to a change in the whole organism? And I think, well, I won't attempt to answer that very mysterious question, but I would like to try and emulate it as best I can. And so this actually relates very much to the Tao, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But basically, there seems to be this kind of magic that nature has that arises from chaos. And we can see it presented in evolution with, natural selection or with mutations, or we can see it in small organisms or large parts of space. So much of what happens we call random, and it seems chaotic, and yet we constantly see these systems and more complex systems come out from there. So I think, or my vision for the future, I say, is that people really can be the same way. And the reason I believe this is because I look at different societies, let's say not modern society the way that we know it, but let's go back and think to simpler times as it was. In a village, there weren't any written laws or rules. Obviously, no one could steal, no one could murder, and if you did, they probably had the guard or whatever come and they could punish those who were necessary. But there was no real governing body on the day-to-day life. And the way that these villages worked was that everyone more or less sort of gone about with their business, and you just develop natural relationships, and since there's no other options, you're not thinking about leaving anywhere else, you're not considering what better opportunities you might have, all of these different things that can kind of, I won't say distract us, but they can definitely cause for stress between people, were much, much few and far between because there was much less going on. And I'm not saying the people back then were happier, definitely not in terms of what we know about that time. And I'm definitely not saying that I would like to go back to the dark ages or make the community, without technology or whatever. But what I am trying to say is that I believe people still have the potential within to reach a natural state of order that doesn't come from rules and regulations and doesn't come from telling people how much they have to do or give, but it comes from people naturally leaning towards what they want to do. And so we can see this in many different examples, but if someone is working or if someone is doing something that they don't want to, they do it very, very differently. And if someone comes to work where they're passionate about it, where they would actually do it even if they weren't getting paid, we all know what the difference is and what that can lead to. And so I really believe that if people were given the freedom, the space and the time to not have to worry about their survival, but to be able to naturally gravitate towards what they want, they would have a much easier time accepting other people, and they would have a much easier time finding things that they were passionate about and doing that. So I'm just going to go through the chat. Oh, I can see that, yes, very interesting. Order doesn't exist without chaos, just like chaos doesn't exist without order. Yeah, yin yang, absolutely. So this is a concept that I see in nature, where there's no governing body, there's no rules, there's no language, and indeed there's a lot more violence and a lot more things that I wouldn't like to have in the village. But at the same time, this natural balance, this natural order does tend to arise. Without it, we wouldn't have complex systems. Now, obviously, all systems are temporary, and however complex or whatever, there's also entropy and things come apart, even in nature. I'm not saying that anything is, can never be brought down, but I think it's a very good starting point when you want to design an environment where people will interact in a healthy way as often as possible, then to emulate the natural systems that develop this by themselves is, I think, a very good way to go. And so I've touched on a few topics there. Sorry, that might have been a little bit going all around, but I want to bring it back to a few key points to sort of put this all into perspective nicely. So the next concept that I'm going to talk about is, just a minute. Absolutely. Revived Sociology says all this requires us to give up the comfort of rules and certainty, of course. So I'm going to get into that more later, but yes, definitely. It requires giving up that illusion of control where I know what's going to happen, and if I behave well, then I'm guaranteed X, Y, and Z. But I think we all know that in reality that doesn't always happen. Patient Zero asks if I'm certain we should give up the rules. No, I'm not saying we should give up rules in general or the concept of rules, and certainly we need the rules to be in place for people to feel safe. The question is which rules, and even more importantly, how many rules or what kind of rules. And so I'm specifically talking, I wrote about this before in the post, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit, things like community meals being forced, an X number of times, there's 3 meals a day, everyone has to take part in at least 2 meals a week. I'm just saying. I don't believe in those kind of rules that are putting pressure on people to be part of the group. I think this also stems from my experience. A lot of the time dealing with people who wanted me to partake, wanted me to be part of the group. I wasn't always the best team player, mainly, and this is my point, because I didn't believe in the group, whether it was school, whether it was the army, whether it was all these programs that were available because that's what people do, but it wasn't something I believed in personally. So when I talk about these rules in general, I'm talking about rules that are limiting people's freedoms instead of fostering a feeling of community that would encourage people to do this without the rules. And so I, make it very clear that this isn't anarchical. I have a young child whom I would not want to live in an environment where, I wouldn't feel that he was safe. So clearly there are going to be rules, and anyone who oversteps or whatever, they will be dealt with in whatever way, and some people won't be, they're not going to be right for the eco-village, or the eco-village won't be right for them. I completely accept that. But when we're going over the rules, and when we're going over how do we construct a society where we foster a sense of community that will bind us together, in a lot of cases we've seen that people felt that you need this sort of routine, these rigid structures that will force everyone to spend time together and to share their thoughts and to share their feelings. And I don't want to force that. I think it can come up naturally, much, much more easily and more healthily. Okay, so just in the chat, I've got a few. Revised Sociology says, just to drop in as a sociologist, you're chiming with Zygmunt Bauman's ideas on postmodern ethics. My friend, when he hears this, is going to be so happy to read that comment. I actually haven't read, I've only heard about Bauman from this friend of mine, so I'm going to make sure afterwards to read up on him. Thanks for that, Revived Sociology. Okay, so let's move on to another concept which is very important. What are we doing on time? Okay, excellent. So there's one concept that I want to talk about, which is abundance mindset. And this is a phrase that was coined by, I can't remember who originally used it, but I'll give my definition so that we're all on the same page. I think the easiest way to sort of demonstrate it is through the opposite, which is what I feel I was taught by capitalism, which is to constantly be searching for that next newer, better product and constantly feeling in the need of something else, feeling lacking. And so when I talk about an abundance mindset, I really mean that this is a very deep part of the human consciousness that has to be present in the eco-village. And this is a feeling that I believe will be fostered by showing abundance, and having people live in this abundance will actually bring it home much better than I could ever explain it to someone or try and convince someone. But when I was traveling around and when I was meeting people, I was constantly having this conversation and talking to them about how all of the cost of living was so high and nature provides everything for free. And everyone had the same understanding of what I was talking about. And so no matter what age, no matter what sector of life or what country, everyone was in the same position of feeling that before you can live, before you can do anything else, you got to get rid of this whole survival, struggle, work, all of these very tough constraints that we just have to deal with. They're just part of life. But at the same time, when I was talking about these solutions, it was very hard for people to grasp. They could never really let go of that feeling of owing something to someone. I owe my time, I owe my money, I owe something, and I'm not truly free. I'm indebted. And this led me to believe that the abundance mindset, which I would like to say it's something that I practice. I can't say that I'm beyond, ever wanting anything. But I would like to say that I'm really consciously trying to remember that in the same way that things come and go, our illusion that we're needing something or that we don't have something that we need is always possible to have that mindset. No matter where I am in life, no matter what I'm doing or what I have, I can always feel that lacking. And if that's the case, then it should be that no matter where I am in life, I can always feel the opposite. I can always feel abundance. And this is much more true. We could talk about this philosophically, that you can be content with whatever you have, and as long as I'm healthy and my family is good, then what more could I want? But I really mean in a deeper sense that with the eco-village, once the self-sustaining systems are in place and people no longer have to work or pay for food or for their home or for electricity or for water or for any of their survival needs, there's a very large shift in consciousness that could happen to suddenly sort of exhale and just feel free to say, okay, I now don't have to do anything to survive. What do I really want to do? And I feel that anyone in the eco-village who doesn't have this mindset, that would be the easiest place for them to start this sort of thought process of comparing themselves to others, seeing how much other people are giving, how much people are getting, what's my percentage, and all of these calculations that as soon as we start making them, I think that they really can be so detrimental. I've seen it happen so many times. And if you've got someone saying, you know what, I'm going to go and build a shed for the goats, not because anyone asked me, not because I have to, just because I want to. And then you go and someone sees you on the way and says, oh, what are you doing? And you say, I'm just going to go and build a shed. And they say, oh, let me join you. I got some nails and some timber. And before you know it, without any rules or regulations, people naturally are going to do something because that's what they want to do. That's the feeling that I want to foster in the eco-village, that everything that's done is actually done from a pure place of wishing to do it and nothing else. And I believe that's tied into the feeling of abundance, where only when I feel that all of my needs are met, that I don't have to fight for my survival, that I can actually reach this state of wanting to do things freely and not wanting anything back because I'm not lacking. Daniel Frank Lamb asks if I'm talking about a kibbutz. I won't go too far into this, but I'm Israeli, so I grew up on the concept of kibbutz, and I have a lot to say on this subject. I personally never really connected with it, mainly because I've met so many people who grew up on kibbutz, and regardless of the way they educated or treated children, we won't go into that, but everyone I met grew up with this horrible feeling where everyone knew everything around them. They had no privacy. They were constantly judged. The same people who knew them as babies knew them throughout their lives. And there was this real sense of the opposite of a community, this sense that there's a lot of tension underneath. Now, a lot of that was brought on because of the economic model, which is complete sharing of individual households, and you would meet and decide who gets what. And once that sort of broke up and they were privatized and became not kibbutzim, but basically just, I can't remember the word in English, but like villages, they're called moshav. It's technically still called a kibbutz, but it's a privatized kibbutz. A lot of those problems went away, and some people worked in certain jobs that yielded more money, and that was fine, and other people were making less money, and that was also okay. And suddenly all of that tension seemed to vanish, not because people were making or giving more or less, but because there wasn't that feeling of I'm responsible for them, they're affecting my economy, etc. And so I actually want to lead on with this because that ties in very nicely to my next subject, which is individualized households. And this is very crucial. So before I get into that, let me just go through the chat very quickly. Okay, Rondon asked what the incentives. I'll just very quickly and simply say, how should I put it? The same incentives that an ant has, and this is very Taoist. An ant or a person or whatever, eats when he wants to eat, sleeps when he wants to sleep, shits when he wants to shit. And that's it. And I think that simplicity, although it's obviously slightly exaggerated, is definitely the way to go. When I want to incentivize someone else to do something, I think the best way would be to do it myself and to show by example and to try and bring people along in the same way we do that in life. In life, I never think, okay, what kind of rules or what incentives can I offer, or how can I make my friend do something? I very often come and say, hey, I need a favor, I'm moving house, can you come and help me pack up some stuff? And either they say yes or they say no, but there's this very, very easygoing, natural relationship that happens between friends, and that has to be the guiding principle, not incentives of you have to do this because, but let everyone do what they want and see where that gets us. Okay, that was a little too long for one question. Swoop. Okay, you know what, Swoop? I'm going to answer that question at the end because I'm not sure how long I'm going to get into that, but I do have a lot I want to say about welfare, and I think welfare it doesn't work, basically. But never mind that. Not never mind that, sorry. I will get back to that, but later. Let's see. Patient 0, he wasn't till he learned it was illegal. Oh, sorry, I might have missed out of that. Okay. We have, Revised Sociology says we have the royal family is a great example. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next subject. Keep writing in chat and I will keep popping in, but I'm noticing that somehow these 50 minutes flew by and I want to get through what I had. But no rush, just, first show and nervous. Okay, so the next point, which ties into what we were talking about with these kibbutzim, is individual households. when I first, I should say, I'm going to speak in first person just because it's easier. Everything I say, my wife and I did together, but it'll just make it flow more. So when I first was talking about the idea of the eco-village, and I was talking to people in Hebrew from Israel, I was calling it always a community. And I noticed that people had this real, what Korzybski called semantic reaction. They had this real they would tense up at the word community. I think the closest translation for that word from Hebrew would be a commune. And a lot of people, well, everyone I told was automatically assuming that I meant people, a kibbutz, sharing their money, sharing the work, going over different finances together, and everyone was very, very apprehensive about that. And so we decided to change the term to eco-village, and that was really one of the big reasons. But it's because this is such an important point. I don't understand basically how that became an idea that if we shared money and gave it out equally, that somehow would make everything okay. I don't think people should get the same amount of money. I don't think they do. I think people are very, very diverse, and the more we try to generalize and make everyone the same and behave the same, it really doesn't work that well. And I think one of the principles, if we're talking about biomimicry, we can look at monoculture, where the less diversity, the easier it is to maintain and manage in a way, because it's all very organized, but the much less successful it is. And so when it comes to the people in the eco-village living together, it is absolutely crucial for each one of those units to be a separate unit in terms of its functioning. So this is both sustainability, all of the life-sustaining systems must be on an individual basis per unit, per house, per family, per individual, whatever it is. But the water, the food, the waste management, all of that has to be completely decentralized and just by a unit basis. And the second part of that is obviously the economics, the money. I won't go into the exact numbers, as that's not relevant, I think, for what I'm trying to say right now, but there will be a separation between an individual's money and the eco-village's money. The idea being that the eco-village will hold as little money as possible, since this really isn't necessary for anything, you only want to use it to do things with it. But the main idea is that there will be different levels of wealth in the community. There will be some people who will have more money, who will be able to go and have different experience thanks to that. And there will be people who will have less. And I don't see that as being the problem, or even more so, I would say, if that becomes a problem, then it doesn't matter how much money people have, it will always be a problem. If we can't learn to live with different people having different needs and being treated differently, then I think it's going to be a real problem down the line. Now, Rondon is saying, are you sure this isn't a cult? I'm pretty sure, though, if you get down to the definition of what a cult is, it's kind of hard to draw the lines. I think as long as the place is beneficial to people, you really shouldn't call it a cult in a way. But in terms of people following the same line, then absolutely not. I think it's much more anarchical, in the sense that if somebody wants to do something, they pretty much can, and they shouldn't have to ask permission from too many, obviously, as long as they're not hurting anyone or impeding or anything, etc., etc. But if you want to go and do something, I really, if I want to in the eco-village, I don't want to have to go through all this red tape of getting it approved by 12 members who one of them is holding a grudge so they can use that over me. And why not just have a place where everyone is free to live their own way? And if you have a good environment where everyone is provided for, and this is obviously crucial, but where everyone has all of their needs, then I really think people can be much more forgiving and much more open and accepting of different people wanting to do different things. So it's very much not a cult in my mind. You know, come back to me in 20 years and see what the situation is. But I'll do my best. Okay, I've got 6 minutes to the end of the show. I can't believe this flew by. So let me just go over the chat very quickly and see if there's anything I missed. Oh, swoop. Excellent. Well, you know what? We're going to have people staying for different times as well, so you're more than welcome. Oh, revised sociology said Lamaze model. Lamaze? Oh, West Wales. My parents lived in Wales before they came to Israel. My mum was originally moved there when she was 5. Patient Zero says so many things are cults, even cultures. Exactly, yes. K-12, college, corporate culture, the military. I was in many of those. Okay, swoop. I'm just going to very quickly, I'm sorry to do this. Oh, you know Kajibski? Wow, nice. The map is, that's my, I have that tattooed on my leg. The map is not the territory. Great quote. Okay. I'm just going to go back to your comment, which I said I would go for. Oh, I can't find it now. What was your question again? I'm so sorry. Oh, welfare. Right, yes. This is obviously a big question, and it boils down to a conversation I've had with my friends many times of whether the nature of man is good or evil. Can you trust people to make the right choice? What happens in a real anarchy? And this is something that I'm going to, in a way, bet my life on and pursue this thought. But I think that the reason people on welfare behave the way they do, a lot of the time, not everyone obviously, is because of what I was talking about, their mentality, this scarce mentality where no matter how much I have or how much I'm getting or if it's for free, I'm constantly making this calculation of what it's worth, what's worth my time, what do I do, etc., etc. And that, I think, causes people to feel that they need to defend themselves, they need to make sure they're looking after their own benefits because everyone is out to get them. And many times when I've met these people and talked to them, they really have a victim mentality. They feel the whole world is against them, it wasn't their fault, they're doing everything they can, and so why can't they just lie and cheat a little bit or get something through or whatever and do what I have to do to survive because I'm a victim here? That's exactly what I want to change, where people don't view themselves as having to fight for. You know, I don't have to be lazy to get out of something. I don't have to lie in order to get my way. If you don't want to do something, you don't have to do it. If you want to join in, you're more than welcome. And I really believe that over time, people will learn to develop a much more accepting and be motivated to do a lot more. But okay, that's a very, very short answer. I'll talk about this more, I think, in coming shows because it's a very important issue and I'm afraid I really don't have time to go into it right now. Okay, so we got about 3 minutes left. Let me just go through the chat. Swoop says humans are scheming scoundrels. That has been the case, but are you a scheming scoundrel? You know, because if you say you are, then how can I believe you if you're scheming? My foster mom, oh nice. Daniel Frank Lamb says his mum's also. Okay. I assume you're joking, Swoop, about the Kajibski stamp, because if not, then mad respect, bro. Yeah, seriously. Okay, I think that's most of it. So I'm just going to end with a quick quote, which I don't know if it's too pretentious or just enough, but it really is something that I wanted to read from the Tao Te Ching, the text of the Taoist religion. And I think it sort of summarizes a lot of what I was going to say. It's not the whole part. If you want to read the whole thing, it's chapter 57. There's a few translations. I can't remember which one this is, but it's the one I connected to. Okay, here goes. Therefore, the sage says, I take no action and people are reformed. I enjoy peace and people become honest. I do nothing and people become rich. I have no desires, and people return to the good and simple life. Strong words. So we'll see, I think, in the coming years how out of my mind I am. But that's been me. I hope you enjoyed it. Every week on Thursday, if you're tuning in online anywhere, then it'll be up on 3Speak on some sound platform where you can download the audio. I'm not sure where yet. But yes, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've been Olev. I hope you enjoyed it. And that's it from me. Tune in next time. Right? Is that... I'll actually make sure with Rondon. Can I go off the air, or is it too early still? I have to wait another 20 seconds for the synchronized watch. Oh, thank you so much, guys. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Wow. Thank you.